A control tool to focus. Therefore, questions are the control to your own experience of life. If you change your consistent questions, you can change consistently how you feel, how you think, how you make decisions, and who you become. The only difference between you and other people is the questions that they ask. That's it. If you see someone who has more success, the first thing you should do is find out how do they think. See, thinking is nothing but the process of asking and answering questions. You're doing it constantly. That's all it is. Here's an example of a woman who asked herself disempowering questions. Here are questions she asked in a period of 20 minutes of herself in conversation with a friend of mine. And we just wrote them down as we listened to them. And I'll just give you a little background on this woman. She's quite unhappy. She's an artist and she was just divorced. Listen to some of the questions. First question, she looks at her artwork. She's given her heart and soul to it and she says, is this saleable? Next question, am I doing this with integrity or is it just another sale? Think what that would do to your self-esteem to be asking that about yourself. Then her next question is, well, what does it matter anyway? How would that be for demotivating your whole life? Next question, why can't I just retire? That's not exactly going to make you a great artist and make you want to share your work. Next one, how long do I have to wait for someone to rescue me? There's a situation where you're not going to be empowered in your life, totally in reaction. Next one, what should I tell my therapist about this? Next one, she said, is should I tell my therapist about this? Next, she said, do I have any experience doing this? By the way, this is a question I rarely ask myself. That's one of the reasons I'm empowered. Because if I kept saying, well, do I have any experience doing this? Most of the things I now do, I once didn't have any experience. I wouldn't even have tried it if I asked that question. Don't ask yourself, do I have any experience doing it? Ask yourself, who's already getting results who I could model? What could I do right now to emulate them? That's an empowering question by contrast. Next question she asked herself is, am I sabotaging myself? Remember, if you do that, you create doubt. You begin to wonder if you're sabotaging yourself. You look for reasons to back up that idea as you ask the question. Why can't I be married to a wealthy man? Why have I done this to myself? Has my entire life been nothing but a self-sabotage? Last one, why do I make myself so unhappy? Most people have a string of questions they use to destroy themselves. Don't let this be you. You got to start listening to what you say to yourself, not just what you say, but the questions you ask. They control it all. See, one day I was thinking to myself, what really makes the biggest difference in life? Who I've become, who I am as a person, where I'm going. What determines that? And my answer was, well, it's not the events that shape my life, it's the way I evaluate them. And I thought, well, evaluate is such a big word. It's true. How I evaluate, how I look at it, all those different things, that affects me. But really, if I want to take that word evaluation, since it's such a big word, and make it simpler, what is an evaluation? How could I explain evaluations in a simpler way so that people could really use it? So I thought to myself, all right, well, how would I explain it? What would I say? What is an evaluation? And I thought to myself, well, right now I'm evaluating, aren't I? I'm trying to evaluate how to describe what an evaluation is. What am I doing right now? And I noticed something. I thought, I've asked myself a bunch of questions here. I said, what is an evaluation? How can I describe it more simply? What am I doing right now? What are all those things? Those are questions, aren't they? I thought, is it possible that evaluations are nothing but questions? And I started laughing. I thought, well, isn't that a question? And I thought, and isn't that a question is also a question, isn't it? In fact, think about it yourself. Can you think of a situation where you're evaluating where you're really not asking a question? And notice I'm asking you a question in order to get you to evaluate. The point is this. Evaluations are nothing but questions. If we change our questions, we change our experience. We change who we are, how we think, and what we do. So if we want to control our life, we want to control our questions. And here is something I've already said in this tape. I want to say it again because I want you to hear me and I want you to remember this. If you don't remember anything else I say on this tape, please remember this. Whatever we ask for, we'll get an answer to. I repeat, whatever you ask of yourself, whatever you ask of your mind, of the world, whatever you ask for consistently, you will get an answer, whether it's true or not. So remember the example I gave just as we started this tape. If you say, what's wrong in my life, there may not be anything wrong. But if you ask what's wrong, you'll get an answer. If you ask, how come I can never work things out, your brain will tell you because you're an idiot. See, the bottom line is if you ask, how can I make this work? How come my life is so great? Your brain will tell you because you're smart, because you've learned this, because you've applied what you know. See, we have to understand that if we seek, we'll find. If we ask, we'll receive. It's a critical distinction about questions. I know you know it, but you need to hear it enough by repetition that you remember it during those critical times when you start asking lousy questions. And secondly, remember what I've reiterated. The only difference in people is the difference in the questions they ask. Think of it. Who are the great leaders that you think of? Let's say, for example, in American history. One pops into my mind almost always is a gentleman named John F. Kennedy. Here is a man who could move us, who was charismatic, who cared about people, who was able to shape a vision and get people to follow and go for it. able to show people that they were responsible for creating their future, that it wasn't just government. In fact, of all the quotes, of all the speeches he gave, one of the most highly quoted is the one where he really got us to ask ourselves a new question. You remember it, don't you? He said, "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Wow, what a new way of looking at things. He got us to ask a question where we're responsible, where we're in charge, where we're here to contribute, not to take. See, that's leadership, that's power, that's vision. Another great leader, let's take Martin Luther King. He was constantly asking the question, how do we create equality? How do we turn things around? And he gave answers, nonviolent answers on how to turn things around, because he asked a different quality of question. He said, how do we do this in a way that's not destructive, in a way that builds? How do we turn the dream into reality? He asked the question. He didn't give up the question until he found real answers. That's power. That's leadership. That's an ability that you and I have. You're a Martin Luther King. You're a John F. Kennedy if you just ask a quality of question that's similar. Think about it. See, Einstein asked a different question. Do you know how he came across this theory of relativity? It didn't come about because he was just this great genius. He did something you could do. He was sitting in a calculus class, and he was bored. Does that sound familiar? And what did he do? He looked at the clock. And as he looked at the clock, he asked himself a series of questions, 5 questions that really changed probably the history of physics, the history of how we look at our universe for many people. First question he said is, he wondered, just a weird, stupid question most people would have thought, how do we know what time it is? Good question. And his answer was, well, we see it on the clock. Then he asked the second question. And the question was, well, how do we see what's on the clock? His brain said, well, the light bounces off into our eyes, and that's how we see it. And then he let his brain really go nuts and ask a question most people don't ask. See, how you get new answers? You ask new questions. You want answers no one else has? Ask questions no one else is asking. His question was, well, what if? A great way to start a question. What if? That's called a possibility question. What if you could travel with the light to the clock, like as fast as the light was going? What if you could travel the speed of light? You were like on the end of that beam of light. And he visualized that. He said, what if you're on the end of the beam of light as it went? What would you see then? And he thought, well, what you'd see is you'd actually see the actual hand go and move to that next minute. You'd actually see the time change. He thought, that's interesting. Then he asked the fourth question. What if you traveled faster than light itself? Then what would you see? You wouldn't see the clock go from 1 to 2 on the minutes. If you're going faster than light, I guess what you'd see is you'd see the clock actually moving backwards. Then he said, final question, would you just be seeing the clock go backwards, or would time itself actually be moving in reverse because you were going faster than light itself? Now, could you ask those questions and thought in a similar way? You bet you could have. The only difference is he had some references on how to be able to back up his theory with numbers and equations. That's the only difference. But the questions he asked, you could have asked as well, and you may have come up with similar answers. Isn't that fair to say? If you want to be great,